Friends and colleagues, welcome to the 2014 Newbery-Caldecott Celebration Banquet. I'm Starr Tronica, President of the Association for Library Service to Children, and it is my great delight to host this evening. Holy Bagumba! Is there anywhere better to be tonight? I don't think so. Dinner is coming, but first, I would like to introduce to you our ALA president, Barbara Stripling. Barbara has led the ALA in the national effort this year to promote libraries with her Declaration for the Right to Libraries, which I hope you have all had the opportunity to sign. Please welcome Barbara.
A wise kindergarten teacher once said, "A lifetime of learning begins with a single moment of wonder." Great children's literature inspires those moments of wonder. Tonight we are here to celebrate our authors and illustrators, the creators of wonder and joy, the makers of imaginary spaces of the mind and the soul. Who among us has not seen the glistening light of understanding dawn upon a child's face when he hears and sees stories of courage and humor and sadness and magic? I am a librarian because I know that I can open those doors of discovery. My role is not to protect children from the real emotions and human events. My mission is to support children through those early years of encountering the world. I must share my love of reading. I must surround them with the very best in children's literature. In the library, I must create safe spaces where children question and risk and try on new personalities and imagine the possibilities. As we honor the deserving recipients of these prestigious book awards, I hope we can visualize the impact of these books. The school is in the inner city, in a poor neighborhood. Rosie, who is just learning to read, comes into the library to find a book to check out and take home. Mrs. Jacobs, the librarian, knows Rosie and how thirsty she is to be a reader. Mrs. Jacobs, with a twinkle in her eye, pulls the latest Caldecott winner from behind the counter, where she has saved it for Rosie. Rosie clutches the book to her chest, looks up at Mrs. Jacobs and says, "For me?" Yes, these books are for you, Rosie, and for all the other children who will spend hours and days and years in delicious reading. I am so pleased to be able to honor the authors and illustrators who have created these award-winning books for our children. Thank you.
Good evening, friends and fellow book lovers. I'm honored to be here tonight to celebrate the excellence in American picture books and to recognize the talent, originality, sophistication, and vision that go into their creation. As the chair of the 2014 committee, I had the pleasure of working with 15 wonderful colleagues who were excited about the charge before us and dedicated to selecting some truly exceptional picture books. Committee members, please stand when I call your name, and audience, please hold your applause until they are standing. Deborah Burns, Cora Dunkley, Carol Edwards, Judy Freeman, Rachel Freed, Carl Harvey, Travis Jonker, Carla Kozak, Dennis Lalou, Miriam Madow, Leslie Molnar, Kathy Short, Blanche Wools, And I would also like to thank Natasha Forrester, a hardworking member who contributed much but was unable to attend the final midwinter meeting. Thank you all for your careful readings and thoughtful comments, for your boundless energy and focus on our task, and for your respectful listening and good humor. Thank you. And now, the Randolph-Caldecott Medal is awarded annually to the illustrator of the most distinguished picture book for children published in the United States in the preceding year. The 2014 Caldecott Committee chose 3 truly distinguished honor books. In alphabetical order by title, the 2014 Caldecott honor books are Flora and the Flamingo, written and illustrated by Molly Idle, published by Chronicle Books, edited by Kelly Chiponery, and Amy Atbo. Idle gently reveals the budding relationship between an awkward young girl and a graceful flamingo through carefully orchestrated flaps. The minimalist setting, limited color palette, liberal use of white space, and carefully paced page turns create a timeless and joyful visual experience. Molly, would you please come forward and accept the Caldecott Honor citation for Flora and the Flamingo? Our next title, Journey, written and illustrated by Aaron Becker, published by Candlewick Press, edited by Mary Lee Donovan, and designed by Mary Ellen Hanley. Finding a magical red crayon, a bored and lonely girl draws a new door on her bedroom wall that leads her to a wonderful but perilous new world. Her drab, everyday reality gives way to a sumptuous, lushly hued world of adventure. Aaron, would you please come forward and accept the Caldecott Honor citation for Journey? And next, Mr. Wuffles, written and illustrated by David Wiesner, published by Clarion Books, an imprint of Houghton Mifflin Harcourt Publishing Company, edited by Dinah Stevenson and art director Carol Goldenberg. Mr. Wuffles finds a new toy that is actually a tiny spaceship in this nearly wordless science fiction tale of epic and miniature proportions. Crisp watercolor and India ink illustrations shine an innovative graphic novel picture book hybrid featuring hidden worlds, alien languages, and one peeved cat. David, would you please come forward and accept the Caldecott Honor citation for Mr. Wuffles? And now, the winner of the 2014 Randolph-Caldecott Medal for the most distinguished picture book for children is Locomotive, written and illustrated by Brian Floca. published by Richard Jackson Books, Athenaeum, an imprint of Simon & Schuster Children's Publishing, edited by Richard Jackson and Associate Art Director Michael McCartney. All aboard! Accompany a family on an unforgettable week-long train trip from Omaha to Sacramento in 1869. Floca's dramatic watercolor, ink, acrylic, and gouache illustrations incorporate meticulously researched portraits of the train, the travelers, and the crew as they traverse the American landscape on the new Transcontinental Railroad. From sweeping panoramas to intimate scenes of life on board the train, Floca captures the amazing feats of engineering and the excitement of a new mode of transportation that changed the face of a new and young United States. Brian Floca, it is my great honor on behalf of the 2014 Caldecott Committee to acknowledge your extraordinary artistic achievement and to present to you the Randolph-Caldecott Medal for Locomotive.
I'd like to begin tonight with some numbers. Illustration and Commercial Art 741.6, Public Speaking and Oratory 808.51. You're all librarians, so I think you see what I'm getting at here. And I don't want to question anyone's intentions, but when illustrators are asked to give banquet hall speeches, someone is showing a callous willingness to misshelve. 20 years ago, I had the opportunity to illustrate a story by Avi, edited by Richard Jackson, titled City of Light, City of Dark. This was my first book. Thank you. This was my first book. The book had a villain. The villain was an artist. And the villain's artwork took the form of immense, garish neon signs. It makes me very happy then to be here with all of you tonight in Las Vegas, Nevada, neon as far as the eye can see, and to have been brought here by the artwork in Locomotive, a book dedicated to Avi and edited by Dick Jackson. Locomotive is a book that took a long time to create. Some of you already know this, and some of you know it too well. The path this work took twisted and turned. Now, an interesting parallel is that the path of the Union Pacific Railroad Company as it headed west from Omaha, Nebraska, also, at least at first, twisted and turned. The difference is that the Union Pacific was under contract to the government and they were being paid by the mile. This is not the arrangement I had with Athenaeum, Simon & Schuster. Why the twists and turns? Locomotive was in many ways a book I had been waiting to make. Trains had been on and off my drafting table several times over the years. And yet for a long time the subject wasn't under my skin in the irrational, compelling way that I need in order to work on a book in earnest. Is there a cough switch on this? Excuse me, God. The essential triggering moment for the book came only when I found myself on an early morning train ride while abroad, away from familiar sights and places. The train rolled first through darkness. Then, when the sun rose, it rose over a new landscape, lit a new countryside that arrived and disappeared outside the window as quickly as I could take it in. That was the moment. There was the feeling of travel, the feeling of moving through unknown places. This aspect of travel reminds us of one of the great tensions of life, the tension between the desire to stay home, to stay in one place, to stay true to who we are, and the desire to leave that place and to risk becoming someone new, to become who we might be. In Lightship, a crew stays put where they need to be. In Moonshot, a crew leaves but returns to home and safety. In Locomotive, a family leaves and will stay away. They've left one life to make another. Now that might sound a little grand, and I don't kid myself that these are the things young readers see first in my books, if they see them at all. Many may not see past the noises and the gears and the smoke and the wrecks. And that's fine with me. I like all those things too, I really do. And an interest in them drives my work as well. But it is the power of landscape and travel and change and home that gets me started and that tells me I will stay interested through the research and the work to come. Not that I truly understood how much research and work Locomotive would require when I began it. L.P. Hartley's novel, The Go-Between, opens famously, "The past is a foreign country. They do things differently there." I stepped rather innocently into that country when I decided that it might add another layer of interest to this train trip I was thinking of drawing if I set it on the brand new Transcontinental Railroad. Through the following months and years, an awareness began to sink in that they did a lot of things different in 1869. It was both challenge and pleasure to try to visit that foreign country, to work to find the right ways to frame and organize what I was learning there, the right ways to make a book that could acknowledge its complexity while staying focused enough for a young audience. It was a pleasure and a challenge to try to make an accurate book that could also be a beautiful book. And how much I learned in that making. Many of my earlier ideas of 1869, I now realize, had come from small black and white photographs we so often see of that period, still images, sober images that might suggest a still and sober time, but instead what a swift-moving and brightly colored time it was. What a pleasure it was to spend my time learning that, trying to think of ways to pass that sense of discovery on to young readers in words and pictures, trying to ignite in that audience a sense of how alive and real history can feel. The attempts to figure all of this out were made through books, through photographs, visits to museums, conversations, on a drive across the West, even in the cabs of locomotives 150 years old. Most of the actual making of the book was done in a studio in Brooklyn, New York. Like the number of the Union Pacific locomotive that pulled into Promontory Summit on May 10, 1869, the studio street address is 119. The Central Pacific engine that day in 1869, by the way, was the Jupiter. Next door to the studio, Jupiter Motorcycle Repair. I tried to have eerie music piped in at this point, but we just... But you may make of those coincidences what you will, and in any case, what I like best about the studio is not the address so much as the artists I share it with. Sophie Blackall, Edward Hemingway, John Bemelmans Marciano, Sergio Ruzzier, and before he cut loose for the West Coast, John Rocco. Hi, John. Writing and illustrating for young people can be a funny way to make a living, and not always funny, haha. While making a children's book, the things one is asked to take seriously and the things one is asked to take lightly can stand in a sort of inverse relationship to the priorities of the rest of the world. Will this be beautiful? Does that mistake look good, and should I leave it there? How did these people go to the bathroom? When making a children's book, questions like these ought to be our highest concerns. For that reason and others, this work we do both offers and asks a lot. When deadlines are coming up, and when deadlines have passed and we are chasing them from the wrong direction, days in the studio can grow long. One evening last year, Sergio put on his jacket and announced casually that he was headed to his home away from home, by which he meant his apartment. Our friendships, our shared experiences, and the inspiration I take from the work being made around me are ballast through all the ups and downs of this career. Dick Jackson was not in that studio, yet he was with me every step of the way with this book. He is my first audience, and I can't imagine a better one. I rely on Dick's intelligence, taste, his sense of theater, his sense of play, his eye, his enthusiasm, and his generosity. The generosity he shows me as friend and bookmaker, and the generosity he lets me know we owe our audience. With Dick, whatever we're talking about doing for a book, it is worth the trouble. And we are not bad at making trouble. Toward the end of July 2012, I received a full-size printout of Locomotive's layout as it stood at the time, and I took it back to the studio, and I stitched it all together and made a full-size book dummy of the book, and I turned the pages with a sinking sense of gloom. How crowded the second half of the book had become, even though we had already bumped the book's length up from 48 to 68 pages. Now, this was very late in the making of Locomotive, I should say, or so I thought. I figured at the time that I was about 3 months from finishing the book. Looking back on it all, I spent about 2 years or more being 3 months from finishing the book. In any case, that afternoon I sent Dick an email telling him how the book now felt to me. At 5 o'clock, he called to say that he saw what I meant and to stay tuned. Closer to 9 o'clock, the emails began to arrive, Dick letting me know he had run the bases at Athenaeum, checked budgets, checked deadlines, and that we could expand the book by another 8 pages. Now, you should know that Dick suggested cutting this paragraph about himself when the speech began running long, so he is not always an expansionist. But in the case of Locomotive, the extra room allowed cramped passages to open up again. It also made room to show a glimpse of the line's construction at the beginning of the book, a scene I had always wanted to include, but a scene that, like others, had been on and off the cutting room floor as we tried to scramble and unscramble the narrative in the book. Neither of us had to ask if the extra pages were worth the extra trouble. Then again, that's the other thing about working with Dick. The trouble we go to is also the fun we get to have. More pages, more work. Getting that news made for one of the happiest days I had while making Locomotive. Our partner in all this was senior designer Michael McCartney. Revision after revision crossed Michael's desk, but Michael, too, is someone for whom trying to get it right is worth the trouble. Michael contributed, aided and abetted, lent his eye and intelligence, improved, and sometimes knew where to draw the line. If you are glad the book does not take 19th century typefaces further into the realm of synesthesia and circuses, Michael's words, he is the one to thank. For a long stretch of making Locomotive, it felt as if the three of us might be making the book all on our own, operating our own skunk works, as if the rest of Athenaeum Simon Schuster had forgotten the book was even being made. Given where I was with my deadline, this did not strike me as impossible, and on some days the idea offered a sort of relief. When the book did begin to approach completion, I began to understand how many people there were at Athenaeum working on its behalf, making sure that Locomotive would be printed and published and publicized in a way that gave it every chance of being the book I hoped it might be. Thank you to everyone who is or has been at Athenaeum who helped this book find its way here. I am also grateful to friends and loved ones who have stayed close and put up with the single-mindedness this work can compel. In this business, the work can be so consuming, can lend so much to one's identity that one can give oneself too much over to it. I thank all those who have alternately encouraged and tolerated the work on such days and even occasionally pulled me out of the tunnel. I've been especially lucky to have Rotem Moscovich at my side during such times. Thank you, Rotem. And if someone at the Disney Hyperion table could just refill her glass, that would be, thank you. In 1995, 2 years after our first book together, Avi and Dick and I reunited for the novel Poppy, which received a Boston Globe Horn Book Award. At that ceremony, Avi gave gracious thanks and also admitted to a suspicion. And I'm able to recite this word for word because the Horn Book will publish the speeches in the issue. Sorry, Roger. The notion of best, Avi said, may apply to sports teams and foot races, but when it comes to literature, I confess to having serious doubts as to whether any piece of writing is ever best for any one child. I remember well sitting in the audience in Manchester, New Hampshire, and thinking to myself, Avi, you just won an award. Just be happy. You have given me the privilege of understanding Avi's remarks so much more fully. Molly Idle, Aaron Becker, and David Wiesner, it is an honor to be here with you and your books, to be here with Kate DiCamillo and all the Newbery Honor authors. An honor simply to be part of a field filled with so many remarkable people working to create stories worth reading, working to create art worth looking at, and working to get books into the hands of readers. The early morning call, the very early morning call that brought the good news brought with it surprise, happiness, the sweet and unseemly thrill of victory, and a tinge of survivor's guilt. Receiving the news was relatively easy. Sharing it with my parents without choking up was the hard part. I was glad that morning that earlier in the month I had defied a tendency toward magical thinking and forwarded a blog post to my parents that paved the way for the good news just a little bit. A blog post that asked, among other things, whether a nonfiction book like Locomotive had a shot at Caldecott recognition. My mother had replied simply, "What do they mean? Locomotive might pull a snowflake Bentley." I am grateful to my parents, to whom the idea of my making a career in the arts felt only slightly more foreign and nerve-wracking than it did to me when I began, but whose support has been one of the great constants of my life, and I am very happy that they are here tonight. Finally, I would like to close by acknowledging that it is librarians and the attention you bring to books that creates a space in our country for the kind of bookmaking and publishing I have tried to describe, the kind that takes its time, that goes forward in a deeply impractical way at times, more concerned with trying to make the best book than anything else. Your attention to our work gives our efforts a glimmer of plausibility, a thin veneer of rational decision-making, a thread of this just might work out after all. You know this already, but I want you to know that I know it too, and that I'm grateful. The recognition you have granted my efforts will help me to keep making work, and for the rest of my career, this recognition and the memory of this evening will inspire me to keep trying to make the work better. Thank you to Chair Marion Rutsch and to the members of the 2014 Caldecott Committee. Thank you to you all. I look forward to seeing you in the hallway and to shaking hands until we all collapse. Thank you.
Moving from trains to flying squirrels, we will now conclude this glorious celebration of children's literature with the Newbery presentation. My thanks to the members of the 2014 John Newbery Selection Committee for your very busy year of careful reading, thoughtful reviewing, and dedicated service to the integrity and principles of this esteemed award. Together, we had many spirited discussions over our days of deliberation in Philadelphia. I am so grateful for your patient persistence as we searched for literary perfection. I invite the 2014 Newbery Committee members to stand as I call your names. And I also ask the audience to please hold your applause until the full group has been announced and remain standing. Marilyn Ackerman. Hey. Robert Bittner. Chelsea Coulard Smith. Andrea Erickson. Kathy Jerombeck. Laura Jenkins. Ada Kent. Amy Kuster, Deborah Ann McLeod, Elizabeth Poe, Susan Paulus, John Schumacher, Amy Sears, Meg Smith. Thank you all. The committee selected 4 truly distinguished honor books in alphabetical order by title. They are Doll Bones, written by Holly Black. Published by Margaret K. McElderry Books, an imprint of Simon & Schuster Children's Publishing Division. Edited by Karen Fatula. In this distinctive coming-of-age tale, best friends Zach, Poppy, and Alice set out on a life-altering quest driven by the presence of a sinister bone china doll who haunts their dreams and waking hours. Holly Black explores complex questions of storytelling, imagination, and changing friendships in this superbly eerie modern tale. Holly Black, please come forward to accept your Newbery Honor citation. for Dull Bones. One Came Home, written by Amy Timberlake. Published by Alfred A. Knopf, an imprint of Random House Children's Books, and edited by Allison Wurtschik. In 1871 Wisconsin, love, betrayal, grief, and violence impels spunky 13-year-old Georgie Burkhart on a gripping adventure full of hardship, heartbreak, and terror. As she tries to solve the mystery of her sister's disappearance and presumed death, Georgie, with her brash, funny narrative voice, entices readers along on her journey of self-discovery. Amy Timberlake, please come forward to accept your Newbery Honor citation for One Came Home. Paperboy, written by Vince Vawter. Published by Delacorte Books for Young Readers, an imprint of Random House Children's Books. Edited by Francois Bouy. Little Man, a sensitive and resilient 11-year-old boy who stutters, ventures beyond the familiar and finds his voice while taking over his best friend's newspaper delivery route. Set in the summer heat of 1959 Memphis, Tennessee, Paperboy is a moving coming-of-age novel. Vince Vawter, please come forward to accept your Newbery Honor citation for Paperboy. The Year of Billy Miller by Kevin Henkes. Published by Green Willow Books, an imprint of HarperCollins Publishers, edited by Virginia Duncan. 7-year-old Billy Miller starts second grade with a bump on his head and a lot of worries. But during the school year, he develops better relationships with his teacher, his little sister, and his parents. And he also celebrates a quiet triumph of his own. Kevin Henkes, please come forward to accept your Newbery Honor citation for The Year of Billy Miller. The winner of the 2014 John Newbery Medal for the most distinguished contribution to American literature for children is Flora and Ulysses, The Illuminated Adventures by Kate DiCamillo. No, not yet. Published by Candlewick Press, edited by Andrea Tompa, and illustrated by K.G. Campbell. The 2013 publication of Flora and Ulysses, combined with Kate's appointment as the 2014-2015 National Ambassador for Young People's Literature, can only be described as both synchronized serendipity and well-deserved recognition. Flora and Ulysses' outstanding characterizations and delightful misadventures highlight this modern tale told in prose and black and white graphic novel pages. Comic book fan and natural-born cynic Flora Bell Buckman and Ulysses, a flying superhero poetry-writing squirrel, join forces to overcome Ulysses' arch-nemesis, who just happens to be Flora's mother. And along the way, they encounter a quirky cast of characters, including William Spiver, suffering from hysterical blindness, and Marion, the life-size China shepherdess lamp. Through laugh-out-loud episodes, this homage to comic books is a testament to the power of hope, belief, and love. As the comic book hero, Amazing Incandesto, so aptly exclaims, "Holy Bagumba!" Kate DiCamillo, please come forward to receive the 2014 Newbery Medal for Flora and Ulysses.
How are y'all doing? I've had lots of visits this evening from Daniel Handler, who has had one thing only to say to me: do not mess this up. It is very, very important. Do not mess this up. So I'm gonna try not to mess this up. I wrote a speech. I learned the word capacious from a William Maxwell short story entitled The Thistles in Sweden. The word appears at the very end of the story in the last line, which goes like this: "And I think that if it is true that we are all in the hand of God, what a capacious hand it must be." The Thistles in Sweden is the story of an apartment on Murray Hill, of the furniture and the china and the wallpaper and the curtains and the skylight in the apartment, and of the cat and the husband and the wife who live there, and how they are awaiting together the arrival of a child. I've read the story at least a dozen times now, and each time I get to the last line, I can feel myself lifted up with surprise and gratitude and joy. That is to say that I am made capacious, my heart is made capacious by the story. It pleases me that I learned the word from the story, and that the word also describes how the story makes me feel, open, more capable of seeing and receiving the wonders of this world. I have carried the word capacious around with me like a pebble in my pocket ever since the first time I read the Maxwell story 8 years ago. I've taken the word out and held it up to the light and admired it, and then I've put it away again. I've been saving the word for something. I didn't know what. In January of 2009, on a bitterly cold day in Minneapolis, my mother and I were walking into a building that overlooks the Mississippi River. Just as my mother stepped over the threshold of the building, she tripped and fell and landed in such a way that she was half inside and half outside. When I asked her to take my hand, she said that she couldn't. I said, "What do you mean? Here, just give me your hand and I'll help you." And she said, "I don't think so. I don't think I can do it." My mother was 86 years old. She was a champ, a fighter. She was, to use the words she so often used to describe me, a piece of work. And so it terrified me when she said, "I don't think so. I don't think I can do it." Two very large men were standing outside at the entrance to the building, and one of the men said, "It's too cold. It's too cold for her to be outside. She has to go inside." This man then took off his mittens and handed them to me and said, "Here, hold these." And he bent down and picked my mother up. He cradled her in his arms as if she were a small child. He carried her inside. And what did I do while this man carried my mother away? I stood there and stared at his mittens. The mittens were made of leather and lined with some kind of fleece, and they were the largest mittens I have ever seen in my life. They were enormous. They looked as if they belonged to a giant. I was mesmerized by the sheer size of them, their capaciousness. And so when finally I turned and followed the man and my mother inside, what was going through my head was that line from the William Maxwell story, "I think that if it is true that we are all in the hand of God, what a capacious hand it must be." My mother was now in the capacious hands of a stranger who carried her into a coffee shop and put her on a chair. "Does it hurt?" the man said to my mother. And she said, "It hurts terribly." And then she gave the man a radiant smile because he was a very good-looking man. And my mother loved a good-looking man. Someone dialed 911, and I stood and held the man's mittens and listened to the approaching siren and thought that this was the first time in my life that I had heard that sound and not wondered who it was for. I knew now whom the siren was meant for and where exactly it was heading, and the whole time I stood and waited, the Maxwell line kept going through my head like a song, a prayer. What a capacious hand, what a capacious hand, what a capacious hand it must be. It turned out that my mother's hip was broken. They operated on it and replaced it, and she came out of that surgery and then had a heart attack, and from there went into organ failure. Less than a week after she fell, less than a week after the handsome man who owned the massive mittens picked her up and carried her inside, my mother died. And on another January day, exactly 5 years and a week after my mother died, the Newbery Committee called to say that Flora and Ulysses, the Illuminated adventures, had won the Newbery Medal. And that is why I'm telling all of this now to you. It is because this book, more than any other that I have written, belongs to my mother. It belongs to her in part because of the vacuum cleaner. My mother had a tank Electrolux that she loved, and in the last year of her life, she worried aloud and often about what would happen to the vacuum cleaner after she was gone. I told her again and again and again that I would take the vacuum cleaner, that it would be safe with me. But still, it worried her. She wanted the Electrolux to be loved, appreciated. And so I wrote a story, this story, in which a truly exceptional vacuum cleaner does a truly miraculous thing, i.e. the vacuum cleaner transforms an ordinary squirrel into a superhero. Flora and Ulysses is also my mother's story because my mother loved to laugh. She laughed in a very particular way. She threw her head back and guffawed or cackled or something. It is the same way I laugh. And when we laughed together, which we did a lot, we looked like two baby birds waiting to be fed. So I wrote this book thinking that maybe this, all of this, the squirrel and the vacuum cleaner and Florabelle and William Spiver and the evil cat and the giant donut, would make my mother throw her head back and laugh. And finally, Flora and Ulysses is my mother's book because I was grieving and I wanted to excavate that grief. I wanted and needed to find my way to joy. This book led me there. Books have always led me there to joy, and my mother is the person who gave me books. She is the person who drove me to the Cooper Memorial Public Library twice a week, Wednesdays and Saturdays. She is the person who bought me books. She is the person who read to me. When I was growing up, there was a tree fort in the rain tree in our backyard. The tree fort had a rope ladder and a trap door, and I would climb the rope ladder with one hand and cradle a book in my other hand. And when I got up to the tree fort, I would slam the trap door shut and sit on the sun-warmed wood under that great canopy of green and read and read and read. I could feel the stories I read pushing against the walls of my heart. I could feel myself expanding. I did not then know the word capacious, but I did know, I could feel that my heart was being opened by the words I was reading. So this precious word, capacious, this word that I had felt before I even knew it, I finally put down on the page. In Flora and Ulysses, I gave the magical, powerful word to Dr. Measham. I let her be the one to say it out loud. I let Dr. Measham be the one to tell Flora Buckman that her father, George Buckman, is very capacious of heart. Do you know what this means? Dr. Measham asks Flora. Flora shakes her head. It means, says Dr. Measham, that the heart of George Buckman is large. It is capable of containing much joy and much sorrow. This, I believe, is the work of stories and bookmaking and art. It is the work that we are all, writers, illustrators, librarians, publishers, editors, agents, booksellers, engaged in. We have been given the sacred task of making hearts large through story. We are working to make hearts that are capable of containing much joy and much sorrow, hearts capacious enough to contain the complexities and mysteries and contradictions of ourselves and of each other. We are working to make hearts that know how to love this world. If capacious was the beautiful, light-filled word that I carried into this book, then banished was its counterpoint, a darker, heavier word that I have carried with me for a long time too. When William Spiver says, "I was banished," he is articulating an ancient fear that belongs to me. Sometimes, when I was a kid, I would stay up in the tree fort and read until it was almost dark. And then when it got too dark to read, I would close the book and roll over on my back. I would stare up at the leaves of the rain tree and watch as they faded into darkness. I was waiting for my mother to call me. She always did. She would come out of the house and stand on the front porch and shout for me, and then she would shout for my brother, and then she would whistle for the dog. And up in the tree fort, I would roll over and pick up my book, open the trap door, and climb down the rope ladder and go inside, home. In the week after my mother died, I heard her say my name. It was just once, and I was asleep. The sound of her calling for me woke me up. Her voice was younger and patient, certain, hopeful. It was the sound of her standing on the front steps, calling for me at dusk. What is the opposite of capacious? I'm not sure. Wizened, shrunken, pinched, narrow, whatever it is, that is what I would be without books. And what is the opposite of banished? The opposite of banished is the sound of someone calling you home. To the Newbery Committee, I thank each of you for your capacious hearts and for all the hearts that you work to widen, open, and make large. Thank you for calling me in the middle of the night. My heart has been dazzled and made capacious by the miracle of story and by the miracle of friendships. Thank you to my editor, Andrea Tampa, for her truly super heroic editing. Thank you to Keith Campbell, whose art made this story deeper, funnier, sweeter. Thank you to Holly McGee and Jennifer Brown. Thank you, Karen Lotz, Chris Paul, Tracy Miracle, and Jennifer Roberts. Thank you to my friends who carry me. Thank you to my mother who read to me and called me home again and again and again. Thank you to the man with the enormous mittens who carried my mother inside. I think that if it is true that we are all in the hand of God, what a capacious hand it must be. Thank you.